Midnight had a way of turning ordinary streets into secret corridors of fate, and in the quiet edges of a small kingdom, where old stone lanes met glowing shop windows, there lived a teenage girl everyone called Cinderella, not because she wore glass slippers, but because people loved giving names to girls who cleaned too much and dreamed too quietly. Her real name was Zareen, and it meant golden, a meaning that felt like a joke in the house of her stepmother, Madame Syra, where Zareen's days were measured in dust, dishes, and the sharp click of expensive heels that never slowed for anyone's sorrow. Zareen was not weak, though, and that is what made her story different, because she learned early that kindness could be a shield and patience could be a sword. And she kept both hidden the way some teens hide diaries under mattresses. The house itself looked beautiful from the outside. Tall gates, a garden with roses, polished windows that reflected sunsets like a painting. But inside it was a place where Zareen's presence was treated like a shadow, useful only when something needed to be carried, scrubbed, or fixed. Her stepsisters, Haya and Nilofer, were not monsters in the way fairy tales often paint them, but they were careless, obsessed with attention, and trained by their mother to believe that beauty was a competition, and love was a prize you had to steal. Zareen's father had once been the warm center of the home, a man who brought her tiny sweets from the market and called her Mary Roshni, my light, but illness had taken him in a slow, unfair way, leaving behind an empty chair at the dining table and a silence that Madame Syra filled with rules. After his passing, a locked wooden trunk appeared in the attic, wrapped in a cloth the color of ash, and Madame Syra warned Zareen to never touch it, her voice sweet on the surface but sharp underneath, the kind of sweetness that makes you feel afraid. Zareen pretended to obey, because obedience was how she survived. Yet the trunk became a question in her mind. And questions, once born, do not stay quiet for long. On nights when the house slept, Zareen would climb the narrow stairs to the attic with a candle and sit beneath the slanted roof, listening to the wind, imagining her father's laugh, and tracing her own future in the dust, wondering why fate had stitched her into a life that felt too small for her heart. She was 15, nearly 16, and she carried in her chest the heavy feeling so many teens know, being old enough to understand pain but too young to control the world. And still, she found tiny lights, the way rain sounded on the window, the way cats curled beside warm bricks, the way stories could turn grief into courage, and stories mattered to her, because her late mother, Umna, had been a storyteller, the kind who made even the simplest lesson feel like magic, and before she passed away long ago, she had given Zareen a thin silver ring with a small star carved into it, whispering, "When the world feels cruel, remember your worth is written by Allah, not by people," words Zareen repeated inside her mind like a prayer whenever Madame Syra's comments tried to shrink her. One afternoon, an announcement rolled through the kingdom like thunder. The palace would hold a grand festival, not only a royal ball, but a week of cultural celebrations where young artists, poets, and students could present their talents, and the prince, Ayan, would attend to honor youth and learning, because the king wished to show that the future of the kingdom was not only in crowns but in character. The entire town buzzed, and schools prepared performances, families stitched outfits, and teens practiced speeches in mirrors. When Zareen heard about it, something inside her stirred, not because she wanted to meet a prince, but because the festival included a scholarship announcement for the kingdom's best student, an award that could send a teenager to the city academy, a place that promised real learning, real independence, and a road out of invisible living. Zareen had been studying in secret for years, borrowing books from the old librarian, Uncle Karim, who noticed her curiosity and treated her like she mattered, and she dreamed of that scholarship the way a thirsty person dreams of water. She dared to ask Madame Syra for permission to attend the festival, not the ball, just the daytime program where students could compete. And the answer came as a laugh, light and cruel. "You, in the palace? With dust still in your hair?" Haya and Nilofer giggled, but Zareen's eyes stayed calm, because she had learned that showing emotion in that house only gave people something to crush. Madame Syra then offered a bargain, smiling like she was being generous. If Zareen could finish every chore, mend the sisters' dresses, polish the courtyard tiles until they shone, and bake sweets for guests, all before the festival, then perhaps she could go. But everyone knew it was impossible, and that was the point. Zareen nodded anyway, because she knew something else. Impossible tasks reveal hidden truths, and she had a feeling her life was standing at the edge of one. The days that followed were exhausting, and each time Zareen finished one job, Madame Syra invented another, like moving the finish line just to watch her stumble. Yet Zareen worked with a quiet fire, fueled by the thought of the scholarship and the memory of her mother's voice. The night before the festival, her hands trembling from fatigue, she carried a basket of laundry to the attic, and as she stepped over a loose plank, her foot slipped, the candle almost fell, and she grabbed the nearest thing to steady herself, an old cloth covering the forbidden trunk. The cloth slid, and the trunk's lock gleamed in the candlelight, old but not broken, and in that moment, Zareen heard her father's voice in her memory, not words exactly, but a feeling, like a hand gently guiding her toward what she had been denied. She didn't have a key, but the lock was weak with age, and a small hairpin, one she used to fasten her scarf, fit into the keyhole, and with careful pressure and a breath held like a secret, the lock clicked open. Zareen's heart pounded as if she had stepped into a new world, and when the trunk lid creaked upward, the smell of old paper and rosewater drifted out, like the past waking up. Inside were letters tied with ribbon, a small velvet pouch, and a folded document stamped with the royal seal. Her hands shook as she untied the ribbon and began to read, and the words made the attic spin. The letters were from her father, written to her mother, describing fear, love, and a promise to protect Zareen's future. And then there were letters from the palace, official, firm, and urgent, speaking of a child with a rare birthmark shaped like a tiny star, and an arrangement to keep the child safe. Zareen touched her own wrist, where, hidden beneath long sleeves, a faint star-shaped mark had always been. Something she thought was a simple mark of skin, nothing more. The document, when unfolded, revealed a truth she had never imagined. Zareen was not merely a stepchild in a rich house. She was connected to the royal family through a secret line, a guardianship placed upon her father after a tragedy years ago. And Madame Syra had married her father not out of love, but to gain control over the property and to keep Zareen's identity buried. Because if Zareen's story came to light, the palace would claim her protection, and the wealth Madame Syra enjoyed would crumble. Zareen's breath caught, not with excitement, but with grief, because the betrayal hurt more than the discovery dazzled, and in that pain, she felt something deeper rise. Clarity. The velvet pouch contained the silver ring's twin, a matching ring engraved with the same star, and a note in her father's handwriting: "Zareen, if you find this, know that your worth is not decided by the house you live in, but by the truth you carry. Seek the palace not for pride, but for justice, and trust Allah." In every step, Zareen sat on the attic floor as tears finally slipped free, not loud, not dramatic, but steady like rain. Because she realized her life had been shaped by someone else's greed, yet her future could still be shaped by her own courage. She knew she could not confront Madame Syra alone, not in that house where power belonged to the cruel. So she made a plan the way teens learn to do when adults fail them. Quietly, carefully, with hope stitched into every detail. Before dawn, she packed the letters, the document, and the rings into a small cloth bag, and hid it under her shawl. She finished the last chores with hands that now moved differently. Still tired, but guided by purpose, Madame Syra and the sisters dressed for the palace ball that evening, their outfits glittering, their laughter loud, and they left Zareen behind with a command to scrub the kitchen and sleep early. The moment their carriage wheels faded, Zareen stepped outside into the crisp air, and the world felt enormous, like it had been waiting for her. She didn't have a gown, she didn't have jewels, and she didn't have a carriage, but she had something stronger: evidence, faith, and a mind that refused to be erased. She walked through side streets to the old library, where Uncle Karim was closing up. And when he saw her, he startled, because the desperation in her eyes looked like a storm. She showed him a letter, just enough for him to understand the seriousness, and Uncle Karim's expression shifted from confusion to shock to protective anger. because he had always known Zareen was too bright to belong in a corner. "Child," he whispered, "this is not a fairy tale, this is dangerous." And Zareen replied, "It is dangerous to stay silent." A sentence that surprised even her. Uncle Karim, being wise, did not try to become a hero, but he knew the palace archives, and he knew which guards still respected truth, so he escorted her through a narrow route to the palace's outer gate, where lanterns glowed like captured stars and music floated in waves. Zareen felt small beside the grand walls, but she remembered her mother's words about worth, and she remembered Allah sees what people hide. At the gate, a guard stopped them, suspicious of a teenager in simple clothes. But Uncle Karim spoke firmly, naming old titles and referencing the royal seal, and the guard's eyes widened when he saw the stamp on the document. Within minutes, Zareen was led through corridors that smelled of polished wood and jasmine, past portraits of kings and queens who looked like they had never known fear, until she reached a small council room where a dignified woman waited, Lady Mariam, a royal advisor known for fairness. Zareen's hands trembled as she placed the letters on the table, and she expected disbelief. But Lady Mariam's face grew pale as she read, because the documents matched rumors the palace had tried to bury long ago. Zareen told her story in a steady voice, not begging, not demanding, simply stating facts with the calm honesty of a teenager who has endured too much to be dramatic. And when she finished, Lady Mariam took a deep breath and said, "You have been wronged," a sentence that felt like medicine. The palace did not immediately crown Zareen or announce anything, because real justice is careful, but Lady Mariam promised protection and arranged a private meeting with the king's trusted judge. Meanwhile, the festival continued, and Zareen heard music outside the door, the laughter of teens in beautiful outfits, and for a moment she wondered if she would ever belong among them. Then she remembered she didn't come for belonging. She came for truth. As fate often loves irony, Madame Syra and her daughters arrived at the palace that very night, glowing with confidence, unaware that the girl they left behind had stepped into the heart of power. During the ball, Prince Ayan moved among guests with polite smiles, his eyes observant rather than arrogant, and though he had grown up in luxury, he carried the thoughtful look of someone who preferred conversations over compliments. He had heard whispers of a young girl brought into the council wing, and curiosity tugged at him, not the shallow kind, but the kind that is born from responsibility. When Lady Mariam informed him quietly that a matter of justice was unfolding, he asked to meet Zareen, not as a prince meeting a servant, but as a young person meeting another young person whose life had become a storm. Zareen was brought to a calmer hallway away from the crowd, and when she saw him, she did not bow deeply or act dazzled. She simply offered a respectful greeting, her posture straight, her eyes tired but clear. Prince Ayan, surprised by her composure, asked, "Are you afraid?" And Zareen answered honestly, "Yes, but I am more afraid of living without truth." And that answer, simple and brave, landed in the air like a bell. He did not flirt. He did not promise romance, because this story was not about that. But he listened, really listened, as she spoke about studying in secret, about dreams crushed by cruelty, about a scholarship that could change her life, even if the royal secret took time to prove. Ayan's expression softened, and he said something that many teens need to hear from people in power. Your effort matters, your mind matters, your faith matters. You should not have had to suffer to be seen. Outside, the festival's main hall prepared for the scholarship finalists to present, and Lady Mariam asked Zareen if she still wanted to participate, because it was her right as a citizen and her dream as a student. And Zareen's throat tightened. She was in plain clothing, exhausted, and the thought of standing on a grand stage felt terrifying. But then she remembered her father's note, and she remembered her mother's ring, and she remembered that destiny is not a gift you unwrap, it is a path you walk. She nodded. The palace staff, moved by her story, did not transform her into a glittering princess with magic, because this was not that kind of tale, but they did offer her something more respectful, a simple, elegant outfit, modest and clean, with a soft shawl, and they combed her hair gently, not to change who she was but to honor her presence. When she stepped into the hall, chandeliers shimmered above, and the room fell into a curious hush, because Zareen did not look like the other contestants. Yet she carried an intensity that made people pay attention. Madame Syra noticed her first, and her face drained of color, her hand tightening around her fan, because she realized the impossible had happened. The girl she tried to bury had risen. Haya and Nilofer stared, confused, then frightened. And in that moment, the sisters understood that cruelty is a loan that must be repaid with shame. Zareen walked to the stage, and the announcer introduced her as an unexpected finalist, because her academic records, verified by Uncle Kareem and the librarian committee, were exceptional. The topic given to contestants was the true meaning of honor, and one by one, teens spoke about medals, family names, and applause, but when Zareen began, her voice, though gentle, filled the hall like warm light. She spoke about honor being what you do when nobody claps, about how real strength is protecting the weak, about how knowledge is a trust from Allah, and how a person's worth is not measured by clothes but by character. She did not expose her family drama on stage, because she refused to turn her pain into entertainment, yet her words carried the depth of someone who had lived the lesson, and the audience felt it. Prince Ayan watched with a quiet respect. Lady Mariam's eyes shone, and even the king, seated behind a curtain for impartiality, leaned forward. When Zareen finished, there was a pause, one of those rare pauses where a crowd forgets itself. And then the applause rose, not wild and shallow, but steady and sincere. The scholarship judges deliberated, and the results were announced. Zareen, the girl from the shadows, had earned the top scholarship to the City Academy. Her knees almost gave way, and she pressed her fingers to the star ring beneath her shawl, whispering, "Alhamdulillah," so softly only she could hear. But the night was not over, because destiny had another door to open. After the announcement, the judge requested a private session with Lady Mariam, Prince Ayan, and Madame Syra, whose invitation to the palace suddenly turned into something colder. An inquiry. The sealed document and letters were presented, and Madame Syra tried to laugh it off, tried to paint Zareen as a liar, but the evidence was heavy, the signatures clear, and the royal seal undeniable. The judge asked Madame Syra one question that cracked the room open. "Why did you keep a royal guardianship document locked away?" And Madame Syra's silence was louder than confession. Guards escorted her and her daughters away for further investigation, not with cruelty, but with firm justice, because the palace did not need revenge, it needed truth. Haya and Nilofer looked back at Zareen with expressions tangled in regret, and Zareen, though hurt, did not smile at their downfall. She simply breathed, because her heart was tired of hate. In the days that followed, the palace confirmed what the letters suggested. Years ago, a royal tragedy had forced a child to be hidden for safety, and Zareen's father had been entrusted with her protection. Zareen was not suddenly declared heir to the throne, because the royal line was complex, but she was acknowledged as someone the palace had failed to protect, and the king offered public apology and private support, including guardianship oversight so that no adult could exploit her again. Zareen moved into a small residence connected to the academy program, a place where she had her own desk, her own window, and the kind of silence that felt peaceful rather than lonely. Teens at the academy didn't treat her like a servant or a princess. They treated her like a student, which was exactly what she wanted. She worked hard, sometimes staying up late reading under a lamp, sometimes crying quietly when memories returned. But each day she grew stronger, not in the way of becoming hard, but in the way of becoming whole. Prince Ayan occasionally attended youth forums at the academy, and when he spoke with Zareen, it was with respect and distance that honored boundaries, because both understood that real care is not possession. He asked her about her studies, her goals, her ideas for helping teens in harsh homes, and Zareen, once invisible, now spoke with confidence about building scholarships, libraries, and safe spaces where young people could find mentors, like Uncle Kareem. The most powerful magic in her story was not a wand or a pumpkin carriage. It was community, faith, and the courage to step forward even when you are afraid. Months later, when the kingdom held another festival, Zareen stood on stage again, not as a frightened girl, but as a young leader announcing a new youth scholarship fund named after her parents, Amna and her father, so their love would become a bridge for others. In the crowd, Some people whispered the old nickname, Cinderella, but Zareen smiled gently, because she had learned that labels do not define you unless you let them. And her true name, Zareen, now felt like truth rather than irony. She did not forget her past, but she refused to live inside it. She forgave not to excuse wrongdoing, but to free her heart from chains. And when she looked at the star mark on her wrist, and the star ring on her finger, she no longer saw a secret meant to hide her. She saw a reminder that destiny can be delayed, but it cannot be erased, and that for every teen who feels trapped in the shadows, there is still a door somewhere, waiting for the moment you decide to walk through it with saber, courage, and the belief that all. Ours plan is wider than any house that tries to keep you small.